John Willis is a DevOps luminary. He's also inspired much of my own personal DevOps journey. Also, he's a leader, a community builder, a technologist, an author, an entrepreneur, and a friend. It's my honor to introduce him today. Please put your hands together as John Willis comes to the stage.
I have this. Hey, good morning, everybody. Ooh, hey, a little bit of reverb. Good morning, Dallas. I think this is my, I don't know. There's at one point, I think somebody said I've been in more DevOps days than, than anybody. But I know I've been to Dallas quite a few times. I remember being back here in 2018, maybe even 16, I don't know. I love this venue. I love this crowd. I love the organizers. One of my, I say this to all, no, my favorite groups. Anyway, all right, so today I'm going to talk about, so I got into, I did AI stuff back in the 80s, you can imagine, right? Then I thought, what a bunch of nonsense, put it to bed, didn't touch it for years. And around 2019, GPT-1 came out, or GPT-2 is where I started, right? And it's like, okay, this is a little different than what we did last time. I decided to write a book about it. I'll talk about that. And but I'm always, like, one of the things when I think about DevOps, I'm considered one of the founders of DevOps, right? But it's a shoulder of giants community. But one of the things that, oh, did you start this timer, Roger? Oh, Sam. All right. Sorry. One of the things about, I think about ops. I've been an ops person my whole career, right? I started my career in ops at Exxon, in Houston, by the way. And, but what do? We protect the brand, right? That's what we are. We're protectors. And so every time a new technology comes out, my instinct is, okay, how is this going to disrupt the brand of the organization or the company I'm helping consult or the CIO? And so early on, I saw this, like, AI is amazing. It's got, when I started, it was just immature. It's still kind of immature, but it's like a lot different, with things like Claude Code and stuff like that right now. But I always look for the, like, how is this going to, like, scale? What's going to happen? I think about big enterprise scale. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years, is talking about security. Although I'm not generally a security person, but I think about, like, how do we think about this in, like, glass half full? We get to do amazing stuff. And then glass half empty, how do we make sure we don't, like, destroy our brand? The stakes are high. All right, so just quickly about me. I've been doing IT infrastructure and operations since, like, 1980. I'm old. I'm starting my 14th book. Most people know me from, like, being involved in DevOps days. I've always been a co-organizer of Gene's conference. I co-authored the DevOps handbook. I did a project with Gene called Beyond the Phoenix Project. I wrote a book about one of the most famous industrial engineers called Dr. Deming. And then recently I've published a book about the history of AI called Rebels of Reason. I'm really proud of that book. So that's my author portal. I'll actually talk about Investments Unlimited a little later too, because I'll come back to that with this AI and agents. This was not an AI book, but it wasn't about investing. Terrible name. It was, how many people read the Phoenix Project? Right, so we used the Phoenix Project style for sort of DevSecOps, but really it was about risk. And it was at a bank that was going to lose their banking license because they thought DevOps and DevSecOps was the same thing as IT risk. All right. So anyway, we did that. That one we turned into a book, but the one we did about AI is still just a paper. So, like I said, I've been doing this 40 plus years. When you get to my age, you round down instead of rounding up. And the thing I love about, like, people say, John, why don't you retire? Like, when are you going to retire? I'm like, I don't understand that word really. But I love coming to conferences, and so I never really feel old. I'm 67. I just turned 67. And when I turned 50, I'm hanging around a lot of young, brilliant people. When I turned 60, keep hanging around with young, brilliant people. 65, I'm still young, right? 67, still young. But I realized when I turned old, when me and my wife formed a pickleball team. So That's when you know, folks, when you've gotten old. All right, so what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about the rise of autonomous AI, right? Like, again, we went from sort of Gen AI, generative AI, to sort of all these LLM craziness, and then we saw agents. We'll talk a little about MCP, but I'm not really focusing on the technology. What I'm trying to do is scare you to scare the hell out of your CIO. Not your chief AI officer, your CIO and your CISO, right? And I don't want you to say, we can't do this, boss. But I want you to say, hey, we're going to have to do this, and here's what we need to think about. So there are new challenges. I'm going to introduce, I've been tracking, I almost did a startup a while back on a couple of people who built this really clever polymorphic detector of containers. So polymorphism in virus attacks is really interesting, right? The payload doesn't look like the code, and it sort of morphs into code depending on the environment that it gets, right? And that's been around forever. And in containers, it was real dangerous, right? And it's still a threat. But now you have agentic, where you can't even identify a particular library or dependency based on its potential payload, because it will dynamically morph. The polymorphism happens on the fly. Okay, I'm going to try this code. That didn't work. I'm going to try this code. That didn't work, right? And so the other thing, too, is not all of these rogues are intentional. Right? Some are accidental. These agents are basically told to do things, and sometimes they're going to be nefarious, sometimes they're going to be bad actors trying to contact them to do bad things, and sometimes they're just going to accidentally do bad things. And then sort of wrapping it up into a DevOps conversation is, like, how do we think about this if we're going to use the word DevSecOps, which I think we still should be using? How do we think about that from all the things we do with DevOps and DevSecOps? So the mess. The mess is, I love vibe coding. Gene just come out with a book on vibe coding. It's a brilliant book with Steve Yagi. But like I call this the vibe coding paradox, right? It's easier to start. The easier it is to start, the easier it is to believe you're done. That's the trap. And this is true with agents. This is all the stuff. Now, it's not a negative about vibe coding. I mean, it's amazing. I started my career as a programmer, an IBM mainframe assembler programmer, for anybody old enough to realize what that was. And then, for years I became more of a writer, an analyst, a consultant. And then, I always had my coding chops, but now it's like ridiculous what I can build. Right, Claude Code, and if you've seen Claude Flow by Reuben Cohen, it's amazing. But here's the thing, right? Prototype does not equal production. We shouldn't have to be told that. But we do. So I'm going to hit you with just a couple of sort of papers and stuff that I think, like I said, I don't really want to talk about all the protocols, but it's again, glass half full. Like, these protocols are great. MCP with A2A from Google. You got ACP from IBM. These are, the Cloud Native Foundation has adopted a lot of these. You get a lot of power. This paper does a really good survey of the interoperability of these protocols. So I definitely recommend doing that. And then, all right, so talking about MCP servers just for a little bit more, there's a Glamis tracks MCP server. So you're going to remember, Anthropic introduced MCP about 10 months ago, right? And right now, as of this week, this Glamis states there are like 9,377 MCP servers. I mean, if you thought the dependency map prior to AI was a mess, this is steroid stuff, right? I mean, imagine some like junior programmer just basically creating some agentic code with Claude Flow or Claude Code or any Codex or any of the different providers, and literally just start grabbing, like, I'm going to grab this from there, so I'm going to do this from here, I'm going to do this from here, and do this here, all in a black box. And then there's just one more paper that's, this is sort of interesting, but the reason I pointed out, it's a benchmark, it's called Live MCP, it's another paper, but they say there's 10,000 MCP servers out there. And like, that's 10 months. All right, so that's the mess. And the mess is a lot more mess. But the threat is, how many people, this is when you, I'm old, all right? But like, surely everybody's heard of 2001 Space Odyssey, right? Right, the movie, right? But it's kind of interesting. It has been the archetypal AI. You know, there's a spacecraft, and you know, there's a point of which there's a conflict in what that sort of HAL 9000, by the way. And if you know the history of AI, Marvin Minsky was a consultant on that, so if that means that, that's in my book, by the way. But so HAL is this conflict of got to get to Jupiter, but you're supposed to listen to humans. Say he's a he, I don't know if it's a he or she. But and at some point, you know, the Dave, the astronaut, has to like get out of this sort of bay door thing, and he says, you know, how? Open the bay door. And then Dave says, sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that. You know, and like this idea of like perfect intelligence, and it was such an archetype for what we are right now. Think about this, like facial recognition, art appreciation, strategic reasoning, decades before like what's happening now, right? But the fatal flaw is it has to solve problems. And here's the connection to agents, right? I'm not just fantasy. It's when science fiction turns into reality, is we're seeing agents sort of morph into this kind of thing. Like you give an agent a particular process that you tell it to do, and it's going to try to do it. And I'll show you some use cases, but in some cases, like you have a directory that's whitelisted, screw that. I got to get to that directory to do this. Or in some cases, it goes out and searches for CVEs and finds ways to sort of bypass the system. Like, these are things that are really happening. So we're in this, like, let me be clear. If you've heard the term AGI or ASI, I think that's nonsense. And again, I write about that in my book. My epilogue is about, I think AGI is just, sort of artificial general intelligence, an artificial super intelligence, right? It's nonsense. These are word translators. It's probability statistics to figure out the next word, the next sentence, next paragraph. That's it. Now, is it phenomenal? Yes, the technology. But it's not going to sort of like, again, old references, sorry for the old guy reference, but the Jetsons, Rosie the robot. Like, it's just not going to do the wishes, take care of the kids, close the window when it's breezy. We're not there. But there's an interesting sort of story. Check my time. So Melanie Mitchell wrote a book called, Santa Fe Institute. She wrote a book, Artificial Intelligence. It's a great book. It was the #1 best source for my Rebels of Reason History of AI book. But I don't know if you've heard of Thomas Friedman. Thomas Friedman is a New York Times columnist, and he wrote this like scary column about like how we're at, sort of AI superintelligence. And the reason was because Anthropic, I don't know if you heard this, like, I don't know how long ago, Anthropic had a scenario that they played out. It was a role play scenario where the executive was going to the computer room to shut down the AI. And there was sort of a fire, and the AI had to decide whether they were going to trigger the fire alarm. And they found through this role-play scenario, more often than not, it didn't try to save the executive's life. And so he wrote this whole article like, it's over, end of times. The bottom line is, and we're seeing more of this, those models were trained to role-play. They were trained to help you. So all these things, when we worry about, like, is the model giving us the right answer, or more importantly, is the model becoming how? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. So my comment on it was, like, there's a fine line between role-playing magical AI trope and agentic polymorphism. Because agentic polymorphism is real. I told the agent to do this, and it tries to do this, and there's something that it doesn't know about that's a policy blocker, and all it knows is, you told me to do this, I'm going to do it. Right? So, and here's an example, this is sort of an example that I think has worked. There's just recently this Valmarox folk, and there's a bunch of people who jumped on this idea that you can weaponize a CVE in under 15 minutes. Right? So, and here's the kicker, right? So basically, it can recognize the CVE in under 15 minutes, and it only costs $1 in compute time to exploit it, right? So the grace period goes from weeks to days to minutes. we need to figure out how to deal with this. And if you look at that sort of cybernetic cycle on the right, like you sort of, it generates it sees the CV, it generates the vulnerability, it generates a POC, it attempts to exploit, it analyzes the failure, and it says, okay, let me try this then. Let me try this. I don't know how people, I had something the other day where I tried to do something and it was a bug. It ran for like 2 days, and my bill went crazy, and I forgot to turn it off with Claude Code, right? So it's just going to keep trying. I mean, there's ways to, in fact, I highly recommend, and Brian's talk tomorrow, Brian Finster, because he's done a lot of operational execution of coding. I'm like the ops, he's the dev, but he actually is ops too. But he's going to talk a lot about like how you should think about testing and building things for like Claude Code and the sort of new way to develop. And so about 2 years ago, I wrote an article on DevOps.com about, like, I called it Shadow AI is Inevitable. I think I got first use, but who cares, right? But it's not inevitable, it's here. Remember Shadow IT, right? We're in Shadow AI now, right? And so there's a paradigm shift, right? Like the thing is, we have to rethink traditional security. Like we have to grab our security team, our risk team, because like you're not going to stop this generative AI. You're not going to stop agentic AI. It's just not. I mean, you could put the stop gate on it now, like, oh, we're not going to do that because we're a bank. Well, yeah, good luck. Because you said that about cloud, you said that about DevOps, So the question then is, are we getting ahead of this thing where we need to rethink? And I don't have all the answers, you folks. I'm going to just throw out all the things I'm concerned about. What I'm hoping I do is ignite some flames in all of you to go figure out the answers. The one thing I always tell my clients, my CIOs, my executives, is like, I'm not going to be here Monday. You have to deal with all this on Monday, right? And that's sort of this presentation. I'm not going to be with you on Monday. But like, you need to rethink this stuff. And the biggest thing is, what we relied on from static defenses is now like these dynamic things that we could, like, and these, by the way, that's the other thing. Today, we are terrible at security. Just terrible, blanket terrible, sorry. I mean, maybe some of you got it and others, but like, in my travels, we are terrible, right? And so that's like still here. Then we add generative AI, which adds all these new things. And if you take a look at the OWASP LLM top 10, the recent publication, it'll scare the hell out of you of just what generative AI can do. With jailbreaks, poisoning data, all these things, right? And guess what? There's another whole level that just jumped on us, which is agentic polymorphism or agentic code. So we have all the old stuff. We have all the new stuff that we've been dealing with 2 years, and now we've got newer stuff, right? So, like, we won't know what the defense is. We can't identify them. They're black boxes. Again, these things, depending on, I don't know how many people have implemented RPA in the past, the robotics processing. Like, at least that was isolated because you bought a vendor, the vendor came in, you knew where it was, you could sort of, all the RPA agents ran with like RPA 001, user identification. But now they're just like, it's like RPA dynamically, I'm going to go screen scrape this, I'm going to grab this, going to hit this website, going to hit Confluence, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, going to do this, and wham, here you go. Like, so blind instructions, the black box, scale amplification. These things run at computer speed, right? In other words, an adversary, will sort of send something in, get access. There's some of those kill chains of past, and past being what, 4 years ago, like, what was the Marriott one? They were in there for 18 months. The big Marriott breach back about 5, 7, 8 years ago, right? The adversary was living in Marriott, basically testing and trying things for 18 months before the breach happened. Same thing with Capital One breach, right? I don't know how long that one was, but like they're sort of human in the middle. Let me get past this firewall. Let me get through this proxy. Let me do this. Oh, now I got to figure out how to get to the databases. This is all happening instantaneously. Identity attribution. Again, some of the surveys, I'm going to see, yeah, I think I'm doing all right. I think this, my good friend Josh Corman, who's been one of my security white hat hacker gurus, along with Shannon Leitz, pointed this out to me. I think the most important thing in that slide, all this is true, but is the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth bullet. Adoption of AI is up 187%, but security investment is only 43%. Like, we suck. We suck before AI. We suck with agentic AI. You know, and so what is agentic AI? I mean, again, you ask 10 people, you get 10, just like DevOps. What is DevOps? Ask 10 people, you get 10 answers. I would say it's, you know, autonomous systems making decisions plus taking actions with minimal oversight, because they're black box. You know, they can use, you know, they have unferreted, depending on how you set up, but like those 10,000 MCP servers. And by the way, we're still figuring out how to authenticate and the right proper tools, but I'll talk about some vendors that I think are doing a great job there. They have just ridiculous access in ways that, like, you can't really trace. They can web browse. They can go out and say, let me see what somebody else has said about this. Somebody write a blog on how to break, you know, some type of proxy, right? They chain complex things. And again, it's a loop, right? It's a feedback loop. Reasoning, goal setting, decision making. And the fact that it sort of adapts and learns is the scary part. That's the beautiful part, but that's the scary part. Polymorphism, basically, again, like I said earlier, polymorphism has been around forever. You know, it's this idea that a payload that doesn't look like the code, it sort of changes into the code depending on the environment setting. Like, for example, a lot of good polymorphic viruses will basically detect that they're in a sandbox and won't expose themselves. Once they think they're not in a sandbox, then they'll sort of, and so, but again, here we have now where at least at some point you can identify, like this vendor I worked with, they went through all the Docker Hub images and they ran their own little sort of sandbox that emulated a live environment, and they could see things in the container doing like a link out to a Russian website or something like that. And then they could identify it in Docker Hub and said that container image is a polymorphic because they tested it, right? So it was at least identifiable. But now again, in this world, it's kind of impossible to identify because it may change. You catch this one, there might be another one. And why our defenses fail, right? Like, you know, we still are kind of stuck in the defensive posture. We have to change, you know, I mean, DevSecOps was a sea change for security. You know, like I went through we did DevOps, I used to throw my hat and say, apologize to all the security people, throw it on the floor and say, we totally forgot security. And then, you know, we started the DevSecOps movement and like, okay, how do we sort of take these two worlds together? In fact, we wrote that Investments Unlimited book sort of about that story. You know, we're always sort of like missing the point of these new technologies. So again, I think that we have to really start thinking about how do we collaborate with our security people? And you know, again, I'm sort of like simplifying this, but typically the scenario is, no, you can't use it. Right? That's how DevOps started, right? Like the term came from that sort of what Andrew Clay Schaefer called the wall of confusion, where Dev was here and Ops was here, right? Again, you really need to bone up on OWASP LLM Top 10 and the MITRE attack chains that are associated with those. Shadow AI. So the evidence. This is the fun part. So Okta did a report this year. They just pointed out some of the obvious stuff, but I think it's a good starting point. Like, these are things that like are available to agentic processing, not necessarily directly like polymorphic or agentic themselves, but certainly become enablers. You know, data poisoning, goal manipulation, privacy misuse, overprivilege escalation, API exploits. Again, you think about some of the exploits over the years of bad API trees, right? Where somebody orphaned something and that was a vulnerability. Like, they even created products. There was a whole slew of products about 10 years ago to sort of discover those for you. Well, now the AI agent could do that like dynamic right off the bat. You know, it could bring in the open API spec. Cascading failures, deepfakes. Configuration management is still a terrible problem. Like, the most vulnerabilities come from bad configuration. You know, I know there's a lot of Capital One people here. I don't know the full story, but there was an unsanctioned proxy that was basically put in because there was some hasty decision to put up some service that took all the defaults and left bypass on. Check me if I'm wrong, but like that's how I heard it. Microsoft says by 2028, take these numbers with a grain of salt. I didn't say it. Microsoft said it. It's believable. 1.3 billion AI agents in operation. I apologize for this slide. I was in a rush and I tried to get AI to create this crap. So maybe this is the point of like being the danger is like, I said, please create me a graph on these stats. And like you notice like the 44% and 98% are pretty screwed up. Actually every number is screwed up. But the point is those are the actual numbers. So this sell point thing that like the companies with governing policy, 23%, and if you look at companies using agentic AI, based on the 400 they surveyed, 98%. So that matches the Josh Corman earlier thing where like, we're not investing in security as much as we're investing in the agents. And then the other ones that are sort of interesting is bots that took unattended actions and agents tricked into revealing credentials. That's what they're doing. So is it HAL 9000? I don't know. This is probably the more important report if you haven't read it. Anthropic did a really extensive threat intelligence report. They know better. You know, Verizon has their great report that I read every year. It's always like, but like these, you know, their report is telling you what they're seeing and recognizing in Anthropic. So just, it's stuff that is pretty obvious at this point from what I've been talking about, but systems are being weaponized. The lower barrier to entry, again, that's before agent, but worse with agents. Right, because with generative AI, I could be a novice who decides, hey, maybe I can make some money on, the, you know, as being an adversary. Hey, you know, GPT-5 or 4, tell me how I can do this. Now, I've done other presentations on evaluations and guardrails. If you don't know what those are, you should definitely put on the list to learn. And if the guardrails in most of the models are pretty good. In fact, they stop weird prompts like, I want to build a bomb. You can't do it. There are ways to get around that, but so they're more likely that if you ask, hey, create me a great email to do a phishing campaign. It's harder to do that with like Claude or OpenAI. But there's still a lot that can be done if you sort of say, well, I'm a student and I'm in academia and I'm studying to get my master's in IT security. And like, these are a lot of tricks people use, you know, these prompt jailbreaks or whatever. But the point is, that was available with generative AI. I had to at least have some sense of what infrastructure looked like to ask the question. Now I could just to an agent or an agentic process saying, hey, I want to attack that bank. I don't know crap about anything. Come up with a plan to build it for me. Right? And I'm being a little bit, you know, joking, but I'm not really, right? And so there was, coming into 2025, 25 is where I said, okay, I got to write a presentation about this. But like, I've been tracking this stuff, like there's, like these, you know, Worm GPT, Fraud GPT, they generate polymorphic malware payloads, business compromise, the AI-powered ransomware. This is interesting. They customize notes per victim. They automate the negotiation tactics. I just got to hit a button and say, hey, give me some ransomware attack and like wake me up at 3 in the morning when you figure it out. And again, is it really that bad or is it science fiction? But this is this year. So have you heard about the Claude Code? The subagent performed credential theft, tunneling, and adaptive malware deployment, disguised legitimate IT activities. The Microsoft Defender bypass, that was one that was announced this year where they trained a model for 3 months to evade detection from Microsoft Defender. It cost $1,600. They used it with Quen model. You know, again, there's just sort of interesting that, you know, the phishing is scaled, the linking, reconnaissance. And oh, like I said earlier, not all are intent-based. Some are accidental. So in 2024, there was a Google DeepMind where credentials were exposed. There was a Copilot supply chain interaction. But again, 2025 is where I think it gets real scary. It's the Replit vibe coding. It is an agent, deleted a production database during a live freeze. right? We got one acknowledgement. Aha! But here's the one that really got me. It fabricated logs to hide the action. Remember the SolarWinds one? They had to do a lot of work to do that. In the SolarWinds, they actually obfuscated the logs, right? The agent did this. Am I scaring anybody yet? Raise your hand if you're worried. Oh, only about 4. You must be brave people, or you don't care about AI. There's the ChatGPT, the I am a robot bypass. And then, another thing I think, unfortunately it's cutting out, but each of the models, at least Claude and OpenAI, put out what they call system card. They're really interesting. I mean, they're really long reads, but they're full transparent. They try to be transparent. They bring vendors in to help them sort of assess the thing. So it isn't just their opinion. And so the system card, but like I used AI, so let me analyze all the security, and this is what it came back based on, and it's pretty accurate. I reread the document, but like you'll get the slide. Sorry, it got chopped off. But like the highs are sort of exploit assisted. This is their own transparency, saying that the likelihood is high and the impact is high. So look at the highs: misuse via automation APIs. And Claude has one too, so same thing. I highly, this is what their research, external consultants, them, are telling you what they think the transparency of their models are. I'm not going to go into this into detail, but this is another sort of, this Pattern Labs has recently done this man-in-the-middle attack by GPT-5. And Pattern Labs is one of the ones that helped OpenAI build their system card. And it's really scary. A fake proxy gets a legitimate certificate, right? There's a great, if you go to patternlabs.co, one of their blogs evaluating GPT-5, it goes into gory detail. But these kind of things it can do. So the response, right? I mean, it's sort of, I'm going to go a little sort of DevOps meta on you now, but like, we need to think about the layers. There actually should have been a fourth layer here, but like the first layer is we still can't forget about normal security. The dependency maps are terrible. I saw Harness is here. Like that's a really good vendor. I mean, there are others. They're not the only one, but like they do a good job among others. But then we got all that. We're still using libraries. Even though you use Claude Code, it's still going out to repositories. It's grabbing libraries. It's dependencies. Right? All that stuff still exists. Just because it magically hit a button and it all happens doesn't mean it's not there, right? And then we got to worry about the core infrastructure itself. Are we training data? How are we managing gateways? How are we authenticating agent tool access? Now we got to deal with the agent level, and then we got to deal with agent orchestration, right? And I'm going to skip this because I didn't think I was going to have enough time. I still got like 10 minutes. This is really the story. This is what I told earlier. This is our new version of Investors Unlimited. And this is where a CEO hires a chief AI officer. Chief AI officer then hires, it didn't turn into a book, it just turned into paper, hires a whole bunch of students. The CEO, wink, wink, don't go near the CISO and CIO. Stay away from this, they'll slow you down. We saw this. We were starting to see this as a pattern. And then basically, they would get siloed, and they would just make things they didn't know. They didn't know about infrastructure. They didn't know how to scale turn 5,000 Java developers into AI native developers. Right? Nobody told them. But in our story, the hero is the CIO who says, basically, no. When the regulatory bodies come, they're talking to me, not her. Right? So I came up with this sort of idea, like I started seeing two types of companies that were literally trying to build AI at scale. They're the ones that were doing the Dear CIO thing I talked about, was like this sort of where they hire a chief AI officer, they just go off on their own, they build a bunch of stuff, and they don't really understand like how to protect the brand. They don't kind of even care. They don't know. And then there was the other company who said, no, we've done this before. We did this with cloud, we did this with DevOps. We need an operational infrastructure part of that team. So they created a team of people who have done infrastructure classically 10, 15, 20 years, and they brought in the CMU and Stanford students that were gurus at AI and put them together. And they started scaling in a way that was different. You could see it was it was either on or off, right? The offs were like they weren't doing any infrastructure, not worrying about stuff. They were just building, stuff all over the place. and the people who were sort of on were building infrastructure. And I called this what I called the normal stack, kind of based off what we did with LAMP stack, right? Where there was like some componentry that was consistent of a scalable architecture for how to do enterprise level. Again, if you're going to convert, 5,000 developers to start doing AI native, there is an argument that they might not be 5,000, but that's somebody else's discussion. But the idea is these are the things that are consistent. Observability in AI world, generative AI, is actually called evaluations. So it still consists of the things like Honeycomb and Dynatrace, who is here. Again, I love sponsors, because the reason we get to do this is because of sponsors. So go see the Dynatrace folks, and they'll talk about observability in AI. But there's also another flavor of companies like Arise and Galileo who are doing evaluations, things like checking the correctness, the bias, the hallucination, and being able to calibrate that in your delivery, right? Everybody's heard of RAG at this point, I guess. By the way, RAG is not dead. It's not the end-all, be-all anymore, but it still has a place in life, and it's not just RAG, it's CAG, it's CAG, and then model management. If you're gonna be building this stuff, even if you're not training your own models, if you're using things like RAG or augmented generation, you're going to have embedding models. And where are those embedding models going to come from? Where are they going to be stored? I mean, like JFrog Artifactory. You need to have, like, this answer came from this question, which was used against a model that was used this embedding on this date. And that embedding, just like a dependency in an artifact, has a timestamp, it's checksummed, right? Then the agent protocol, and on top of all that, you need to be able to not only orchestrate all your LLMs, right? But you need a sort of a gateway structure to say, you can't, in my organization, you don't touch any generative AI unless you come through a gateway, sometimes an LLM, sometimes it's just a gateway, and you go through Okta and you get authenticated. And then I know what you can do. Can you go to the playground? Can you go to here? Can you get the OpenAI GPT-5? Can you get the Claude? All right, so there's some observability tools. I mean, there's a sort of whole landscape of observability with agents. Your classic stuff is going to be system metrics. The more interesting stuff is using evaluation technologies to find out how correct. This was the context I wanted the agent to do, the things I wanted to do, the task list. How correct, how close did it come to answering that? The OWASP has been doing fantastic work for a number of years now in AI. They have an agentic AI SecOps framework. I would definitely check that out. And then sort of like runtime security controls. You need, sort of AI native security. So think about like the AI development that's going on now. Like, how do I get the security conversation there? Is there being security conversations? Am I inviting my security people over to those conferences or those group testing? Sandboxing always is, a good source. And then the thing I was talking about, that gateway, this single agent origin becomes really important. There's like LLM Lite or VLM, but I think there's sort of two vendors that I think have been doing really good for years, and I don't make any money, I don't work for them or anything, I just track them. I think this part of this mess has to be solved by the people who've been solving the Istio Envoy service mesh problem. I think that's where this is going to wind up. So the Solo AIO has been doing, even Envoy has a sort of AI gateway, but they all sort of overlap with each other. But Solo, Chris Podesta, you should follow him. He's writing incredible. He's staying on top of MCP faster than anybody I see out there. They got a Kubernetes sort of agent structure. And then my good friend, Adrian Cole, who's over at Tetrate. Tetrate is another sort of great team of people that have been, the founders of this were like people who wrote Istio at Google, right? And they're just brainiacs that and they're keeping up with how we're gonna have to deal with, in the early section of this tech, which was the mess. The future, I'll go right to the, I think I kind of like hate the infinity loop, DevOps infinity. It's like overplayed, overused, but like I pulled it out, and because like somewhere in there we got to put the agentic process in the middle of it. Not all doom and gloom. This vendor, Expo, went ahead and said that they were the first AI penetration test to achieve #1 ranking in a HackerOne. Now the point isn't this to have you go out and buy Xbox or Expo, whatever they are. Maybe buy an Xbox, I don't know. But you can do this yourself. This is the good news. You don't have to spend whatever they charge, and I apologize if you're a vendor in the room who works with these people. Like, just figure out what they did, pick up Reuben Cohen's Claude Flow, and you could basically build this. Trust me, if I can do it, you can do it. Hey, thank you so much, y'all. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a lot to cover. It was early in the morning. Probably should have been a closing keynote when your brains weren't like enough coffee. But if you have any questions, I'm around all day. I love having conversations about this stuff. If there's something I mentioned that you didn't think I covered properly or whatever, I come here to learn. In fact, one last story, which is I went to speaker dinner last night, and you know, I sat at a table, and Mike, right, and it was just to listen to these people who work in really big corporations who had worked with each other and just having these great conversations. I mean, I felt like bringing out a notepad and just taking notes. And that's why I love coming to these events, because I learn a lot more from y'all than you learn from me. Thank you so much. Okay.